The Oprah Winfrey Show was an Emmy Award-winning American syndicated talk show that ran for 25 seasons from 1986 to 2011. The show was filmed in the Harpo Studio of Chicago, Illinois. Harpo is, by the way, Oprah, when spelled backwards. Given how popular the Oprah Show was, the staff and crew worked long hours to meet what were sometimes tight deadlines. Every department was under the gun. This included lighting, camera work, editing, audition direction, graphics design, and production. During one especially long work session, a producer was still on the job at 4 a.m. when she heard the sound of crying. When she looked up, she saw a gray woman floating over her desk. The woman was wet and looked as though she was drowning. Ghastly bubbling sounds could be heard. As she watched, the figure slowly faded away. When she talked to her colleagues about what had happened, she learned that other members of the staff and crew had seen this ghost. Nobody had previously talked about their experiences because they hadn't wanted anyone to think that they were crazy or were having hallucinations from self-medication. Known as the Gray Lady, it was widely believed by her colleagues that this woman had drowned during the SS Eastland disaster of 1915. History traces this disaster to a factory holiday that management had planned for Western Electric's employees at Hawthorne Works. Hawthorne Works was the manufacturing division of Western Electric. It produced telephones, cables, switchboards, and transmission equipment. As a modern company, Western Electric believed in welfare capitalism. On the premise that a happy worker was a productive worker, welfare capitalism was a progressive-era concept in which a corporation assumed responsibility for taking care of its workforce. In addition to paying wages, the corporation provided a pension, insurance benefits, education, an annual vacation, and recreation that included an annual summer outing. On the morning of July 24, 1915, workers and their families streamed towards the wharf at the Clark Street Bridge. 5 passenger steamers had been engaged to take these people on a cruise from Chicago to a picnic that would be held in Michigan City, Indiana. The first ship in line was the Eastland, which was docked at the foot of the Clark Street Bridge on the south bank of the Chicago River. At 6:30 in the morning, the Eastland began boarding passengers. From the bridge of the Eastland, Captain Harry Pedersen worried as he watched the crowd boarding his ship. Although his ship had been rated to carry 2,572 passengers. Following the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, Congress had passed a law earlier that year which required all ships to have sufficient lifeboats for the passengers and crew. The problem with this law was that the addition of 5 extra lifeboats and 37 rafts had made his ship top-heavy. It did not help that the owners had replaced the wooden decks with concrete as a maintenance cost-saving measure. The concrete alone had added another 6 tons of weight to the ship. By 7:10 a.m., the SS Eastland had reached its limit of 2,572 passengers. Despite this, the owner's representatives kept feeding passengers aboard the ship. When Captain Pedersen complained, he was told to either shut his mouth or to find another job. An estimated 3,000 people would eventually board this ship. At 7:32 a.m., the Eastland lurched sharply towards its port side. As the lower row of portholes and gangways began taking on water, the ship abruptly rolled onto its side.
When the boat toppled on its side, those on the upper deck were hurled off like so many ants being brushed from a table,
Reported Harlan Babcock, a reporter for the Chicago Herald. Given how crowded the decks had been, hundreds of passengers had already gone below where they were being entertained by a band. When the ship capsized, some of these people would have been crushed by falling furniture, pianos, bookcases, and tables. The survivors would have been disoriented, especially after the engine room flooded and the lights went out. With the hatches, passageways, and stairs blocked by bodies, debris, and rising water, it would have been all but impossible for anyone below decks to have found their way out of the ship. Since the Eastland had capsized so quickly, no lifeboats or rafts were ever launched. It is fortunate for the survivors that nearby boats and tugs responded quickly. Despite the risk that the Eastland's boiler might explode, a tug called the Kenosha pulled alongside to rescue passengers who had climbed onto the Eastland's side. Although the stricken passenger vessel had capsized in 20 feet of water just off the wharf, 844 passengers and 4 crew members died. Included among the dead were 22 entire families. While one rescue effort focused on cutting a hole through the ship's hull to retrieve any survivors who might have found their way to safety in an air pocket below decks, Others began the process of recovering the bodies. Although the bodies were initially laid in the street, after criminals were caught taking valuables from the bodies, the nearby Reed, Murdoch and Company building was pressed into service as a makeshift morgue. When the ground floor of this grocery warehouse ran out of space, newly recovered bodies were sent to the 2nd Regiment's Armory at 1058 West Washington. Having recognized the address, the producer gasped because 1058 West Washington was the address for Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Studio. Although the old armory looked nothing like the studio had incorporated the old building into its construction when it was built in 1986. As many of the employees at Harpo Studio already knew, the old part of the building came with ghosts. One of the women told the producer about her experience in a restroom. She had entered the room to wash her hands when she heard someone crying. The crying was coming from inside one of the stalls. Uncertain as to whether she should intrude upon someone's grief, she carefully approached the stall. When she gently knocked on the door, the crying stopped as the door swung open. The stall had been completely empty. The now terrified woman left. After having received a number of complaints about this particular bathroom, the facilities manager had quietly locked the door. Some of the employees also told about hearing screams and cries coming from empty corridors. Others told about hearing the laughter and shouts of children who were nowhere to be found. Footsteps of a large crowd of people were sometimes heard going up or down the lobby staircase when nobody was there. Doors in the building were known to have opened and shut on their own. Building security is alleged to have even caught the image of the Grey Lady on CCTV, but this footage was never shared with the public. As to whether or not Oprah herself believes in ghosts, here is a clip from one of her shows.
Kusa was staying in my house. Kusa has some strange things happen to her all the time. And she was in my house here in Chicago, sleeping in the guest bedroom, which is right next to my bedroom. And Kusa, I don't know, I woke up in the middle of the night. I saw a ghost in the room. I'm telling you, it was a ghost in the room. And I didn't want to believe it was a ghost in the room because I never believed in ghosts or didn't believe in ghosts. But I saw this figure, clear figure, moving across the floor. I got up to see, is there light from another building? What is going on here? Okay, it's clearly. You know, have you ever been in that sleep where you feel oppressed in the sleep and you can't wake yourself up? Yeah, we've all had that. So I wake up and there's a ghost in the room. And so I start saying, Jesus, 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 Jesus. So then I get up to see, maybe I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing. The next morning, a Lukuswa says to me, the figure moved itself and moved and went right through the wall, just left. Okay, so the next morning, a Lukuswa says to me, I had the worst night of my life. I was fighting this ghost all night long, and finally I was able to push him under the door. And I said, and you pushed him in my room! And you pushed him to me!
Although Oprah has said that she believes in ghosts, she has never publicly spoken about the ghosts at Harpo Studios. Some sources have said that she knew and loved these ghosts. Other sources said that she refused to stay at the studio after the sun had set. The Reed Murdoch building, which had been used as an ad hoc mortuary following the Eastland disaster, is also said to be haunted. Lights have been reported as turning themselves on or off without any hand having touched the light switch. Doors have opened and shut on their own. Employees have reported hearing voices or footsteps in the hallway only to find that nobody was there. The waterfront where the Eastland capsized is also said to be haunted. Screams for help may sometimes be heard from the Clark Street Bridge. Faces of drowning victims have been seen in the water. On several occasions throughout the years, the police have been called with reports of one or more people in the water. Upon their arrival, no one has ever been found. As a curious historical side note, the Eastland was salvaged shortly after it had capsized. After it was pumped out, it was anchored and a caretaker was put aboard. The caretaker did not enjoy being aboard at night because he kept hearing voices even though nobody else should have been aboard. The Eastland was sold to the United States Navy on November 21, 1917. It was then refitted as a gunboat and was renamed the USS Wilmette, before being assigned to the Illinois Naval Reserve as a training vessel. It remained in service until November 28, 1945, when it was decommissioned. In 1947, it was sent to the scrapyard. Western Electric Company paid out $100,000 in insurance benefits to the surviving families of those who died. Although a grand jury brought indictments against the captain and the owners of the Eastland, nobody was ever found guilty for criminal negligence. This star witness was Sidney Jenks, the president of the company that had built the Eastland in 1902. Even though the ship had had a pronounced 45-degree tilt at the time of its launching, no stability test had ever been performed on this ship. Mr. Jenks testified that the Eastland had been originally designed as a fast ship to transport cargo while hauling up to 500 passengers. When the defense counsel, Clarence Darrow, asked whether Mr. Jenks had ever concerned himself over the possible conversion of the freighter into a passenger steamer with a capacity for 2,500 passengers, Jenks replied,
"I had no way of knowing the quantity of its business after it left our yards. No, I did not worry about the Eastland."
Although litigation intermittently dragged on for an astounding 24 years, nobody was ever held financially or criminally responsible. In the end, the ship's engineer was blamed for having mishandled the ballast tanks in the hold. Since the engineer had died in the disaster, he was unable to defend his reputation. In 2016, 5 years after the last episode of Oprah had aired, Harpo Studio was demolished to make way for the new McDonald's headquarters. I cannot help but wonder if anyone at McDonald's has had any paranormal experiences or if these hauntings ended with the demolition of the old armory. So what do you think? Did ghosts from the Eastland disaster haunt Harpo Studio, or was this a case of mass hysteria caused by tight deadlines with too little sleep? What about all of the people who have called the police over the years with reports about victims who were drowning in the river? Were these practical jokers, or do you think they really saw and heard something? Please share your opinions in the comments below.
If you liked this video and would like to see more content, please click on the like and subscribe buttons.